Hi, my name is Kevin Beasley, and my dream is to end starvation around the world.
Yeah, cheese weeb.
I was born in Columbus, Georgia in 1995. Columbus, Georgia, if you don't know, known for several things. Known for John Pemberton, the inventor of Coca-Cola. He was actually from Columbus and made it originally in Columbus. And then he took the first prototype to Atlanta. And then Atlanta stole all the credit for the discovery and the history of it. Columbus, Georgia, birth of Wayne Brady. But the most important thing about Columbus, Georgia is Katy the Cow, a wonderfully rich and important historical landmark depicted where the old dairy creamery was, but also was the shining beacon for the Best Buy all through the 2010s. Katy the Cow has now since been moved and is no longer at the Best Buy store, which has been turned into a Crunch Fitness, but has now been relocated to downtown. But I was born in Columbus and raised by two wonderful women, my grandmother Nini and my mom, both whom raised me to be as kind as I could possibly be to as many people as possible, to lead my life with empathy, and to make sure to treat others the way they wanted to be treated and think about the consequences of my actions. One of my favorite memories of Nini was when we went to the circus when I was in the second grade. We went to the circus and they started bringing the animals out and they brought the elephants and the elephants started shitting during the circus. And I pointed and I laughed and I said, ha ha ha, ha ha ha, elephant farted. And Nini said, we gotta go. But because I said a bad word, Nini said that we had to leave the circus. But that's sort of the standard that I was raised with. Anyway, I'm mentioning all this because I've got autism and ADHD. The autism, I'm starting a YouTube channel. And I feel like it's only fair if you're going to consider subscribing to me that you know a little bit about who I am, what I care about, and what my goals and passions are. As far as my passions, I mentioned ADHD. I've always jumped around a lot. I like doing a lot of various things. I like learning about a lot of different things. Once I get in somewhere, and I think I've learned most of what I can from that place, I tend to start to get bored until I eventually move on to a new business or a new thing to learn about or a new hyperfixation. One of my favorite quotes, for example, is actually something that's misquoted a lot. It's the quote, "Jack of all trades, master of none." That's actually the shortened down version. The full quote is, "Jack of all trades, master of none, but still better than a master of one." I've always valued being able to jump around and move into different positions and have the opportunity to learn about new things. And I think that's fairly consistent with my job history over the years. My first job that I ever had, I was a hula girl. I wore a grass skirt and a coconut bra. And I waved a sign on the edge of a street. There's a picture of it somewhere. Maybe I'll dig it up someday. But it was a wonderful first job to have. I got to work outside. I got paid underneath the table, like $10 an hour in high school. Worked weekends. But the best part of the gig was the unlimited free ice cream. I'm talking unlimited shaved ice, unlimited popsicle ice creams, like with the character faces, like with Bugs Bunny, like with Sonic the Hedgehog. Unlimited Sonic the Hedgehog. So that job was fun for a while, but eventually I needed to start pulling in more money and more hours. And I moved into my first real job, being at a bowling alley. I do not recommend working at a bowling alley. I worked there for about 6 years. I worked there through high school as well as through college. My first official position in the building, I was called Ambassador of Fun. Essentially, my job was to walk around and try to get people to buy more shots, to try to get more drunk. That position lasted a week and then they got rid of it entirely. They moved me to the front counter. I worked there for a little while until they made me shift leader, and then I bounced around to every position, working in the kitchen, serving, party hosting, mechanic, everything far and few between. Whatever the bowling alley needed, they took from me. I mentioned that I was going to college while working at the bowling alley. I went to Columbus State University as a theater major, with specifically focusing in carpentry and set design. It was a really cool experience, and I got to learn a lot, not only about carpentry, construction, about art, design, about history involving all of it. I made a lot of friends, I learned a lot, but I very much valued my college experience. My first year was focusing on classes for the most part. Second through fourth year, I was essentially a leadership position for every show that the school hosted, about 7 shows a year between main stage productions, side productions, as well as student projects. And I was doing those positions either as a master carpenter, as the assistant technical director, the technical director, the assistant set designer, or the set designer. Again, I learned a lot, but all of this was unpaid labor. Because I was working at the bowling alley, I made too much money to be able to be a part of the student employee program, being paid for my time in the shop. So from about my sophomore through my senior year, I was working 30 to 40 hours a week at the bowling alley, 30 to 40 hours a week in the scene shop, and then on top of that also did about 12 to 15 credit hours on the semester depending on it. And throughout all of that, I got completely burned out. I decided to take a little bit of time off of college my senior year to focus just on work, during which time I got promoted to the assistant general manager, and I got so distracted that I was never able to go back and finish my college. While I was there, I was working about 90 to 110 hours a week, during which, of course, I only got paid 40 because I was a salaried manager. And it's so funny, but the several times that I went to my district manager to ask for help, it simply wasn't in the budget for us to be able to hire another position to help. Ain't it a shame? So eventually, I said, fuck this, and I left that job. I left the bowling alley, and I decided to go work at a living history museum called Westville. Westville is a town, but it's set in the 19th century. So Westville, we had a blacksmith, we had a carpenter, a dressmaker, a bootmaker. We had several people as well that were interpreters who were there to tell the stories and the histories, the houses and the families that lived in them. But the idea is that it's a giant history lesson. I've always had a big fondness for history. I find human origins and where we came from absolutely fascinating. I went into this position at the museum a little bit at a lower position, just being their front counter attendant. After a couple of weeks, they decided to promote me to their events manager, during which time I took over all of the events for the museum, including, things like harvest festivals, our Christmas village experience, in which we decorated the whole village. But they deemed that it was appropriate for us to specifically have sexual harassment training, as well as diversity and inclusion training. It was then deemed that I would be the most appropriate person to tackle this responsibility, and so I created my own training plans for how to train people about sexual harassment as well as diversity and inclusion. Had several people look after my work and review it to make sure that everything was appropriate, and more importantly, appropriate for me to be able to communicate to everybody. Being at the time presenting as a cis white man, but actually making the material and then spending the time to make sure that people were trained on and understood the material that I had made really solidified the idea that I value education and I value teaching people as much as possible. That was the actual thing at the bowling alley that I enjoyed the most, was training other people on how to do the job. But after a couple years of working at Westville, I was feeling a little lost and feeling like I wasn't exactly sure where I wanted to go in life. I had remembered a couple years earlier, my dad and stepmom had taken me to New York City. It was my first time ever being there, and while we were there, we went to a place called Saxelby Cheesemongers. Saxelby Cheesemongers at the time was a small little counter that you could find inside of a market. But we went to the cheese counter, and it was my first time ever experiencing this. Columbus, Georgia is a little bit of a food desert. There's not a lot of options for fancy food, at least when I was growing up here. While at Saxelby Cheesemongers, we were talking about the products that we were sampling and trying as we built out a little plate of cheese that we were going to be taking along with us to see the Statue of Liberty. And while we were talking about the cheese, we were going over the history of the products. We were going over the way that it was made. He was telling me about the animals and about the makers that actually make the product. And it was such a rich history with such a nice little window into human origins and where we come from. I was fascinated. There's a very rich history with cheese and the way that it's interacted with humans and humans surviving up until this point. In my free time, I started researching cheese. I started learning about more cheeses. I would go and I would buy various cheeses to come back home and try. And this all led to me going to a cheese class in New Orleans, put on by the St. James Cheese Company, who I think they have two locations. I think they have 2 locations in New Orleans. But I went to a cheese class held at the Sazerac House, a local liqueur that they make in New Orleans. The class was super cool. I got to learn a lot about cheese. I was the only person interested in asking questions. It was a very introverted class, it felt like, but I was constantly asking every opportunity I could questions of the cheesemonger that they sent. This all culminated to the end of class. The cheesemonger came up to me first thing as soon as the class ended and said, "Hey, you seemed really interested. I just wanted to come over while I had a second and see if there's any other questions you had, if there's anything I could help you with." I said, "Thank you so much. That's so incredibly kind." How'd you fall into this? Like I'm hearing you talk about this. I'm doing my own cheese research at home. I like trying cheeses, but trying cheeses is getting too expensive for me to do on a hobby level because I just keep buying cheese. How'd you get into this? And I'll never forget what they said. They responded with, "You just kind of do it." Upon hearing that, my path was clear. The new goal, I was going to learn about cheese. I was going to find out everything I could about cheese. I was going to become that wealth of knowledge that I had seen other people offer to their community. So soon after that, I decided it was time to move to Chicago. So in my humble opinion, Chicago is probably the best city in the world. That being said, I hate it for about 7 months out of the year. It's an absolutely incredible city. Some of the nicest people I've ever met in that place. It's got beautiful architecture. The summers and springs and falls are absolutely gorgeous. It's a wonderful place to be unless it's winter time. Unfortunately, Chicago is just so cold. So I moved to Chicago with one goal in mind, to learn everything that I could about cheese. But I wasn't sure how quite to do that yet, and most importantly, I needed a job to sustain things as long as I could. And so I got a little job at a smoothie shop. It sucked. I didn't enjoy my time there. It didn't last long though. After leaving the smoothie shop, I then was able to weasel my way into an open interview at a store called Italy. So if you haven't heard of Italy before, Italy is an Italian company, if you can imagine Italy being an Italian company. But Italy is an Italian company. It's kind of like a grocery store, but grocery store turned tourist trap. So the first Italy that I went to was in New York on that trip I mentioned. It was the Flatiron location, and it's beautiful in there. You walk in and there's gelato, there's a beautiful produce section. There's, I think, 8 different restaurants that make up the place, each separated into its own theme between meat, seafood, produce, their pasta restaurant, their pizzeria restaurant. It's an absolutely incredible building. So I found an Italy in Chicago and I weaseled my way into an open interview. And upon getting there, they asked me if I had any intention as far as the role that I had in the building. And I said, yes, I moved to this city with the goal of learning about cheese. I want to learn everything I can about it, and I want to try to teach others about it because I love this food. And then they brought over the manager of the cheese counter. He's the nicest guy in the world, but he asks me if I have any experience working with cheese. And I say, no, I don't. I don't have any experience working with this product. But I have a passion for it, and I really want to learn about it. I really want to learn everything I can about it. And apparently that was the correct answer, because with no experience, he said, all right, good enough. So just like they had said in the cheese class, you just kind of fall into it. I was lucky enough to be at the right place at the right time and have a guy as kind as my previous boss as being willing to let me come in there with no experience whatsoever, but just a drive and a passion. I was instantly blown away by the kindness of those people that I had around me. For instance, one of my coworkers, he was, I want to say about 50 years old, but on my first day there, he asked me what kind of experience I had. And I said, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of experience in this. This is sort of my first day into this venture. I just really want to learn a lot. And then he took an extra hour and a half after his shift had ended to walk me through each and every station, each and every section of cheese, and tell me all of the offhand knowledge that he knew about that, as well as he did the same thing with the meats, telling me all of the important things. And so my cheese journey began. I started learning about every cheese that I possibly could. Every day, my plan was to try to learn about like 3 cheeses, and then I would take that information home, study it, commit it to memory. The next day in, I would try to sell those 3 cheeses as much as possible to as many people as I could possibly talk to. And through that process over time, doing that over and over and over, I developed like a Rolodex of various cheeses in my head. So this seemed like a great opportunity and a great vehicle for me to explore my love of learning, my love of just hyperfixating on a random topic for a little while, my love of food, my love of cheese, all wrapped up in one little career. As I learned more and more about cheese, I eventually had the opportunity to actually join the events team with Italy. during which time I got to be a part of anywhere from 10 to 40 professional Italian classroom events led by a chef instructor and or various instructors that we had throughout the building, such as our wine guy, my boss, the cheese guy. And eventually this led into me teaching classes of my own in Italy, various cheese classes, cheese and wine classes. But one of the most fun parts of the job was that I also got to be there as the operations manager for the events team for all of the pasta making classes, all of the pizza making classes, all of the wine tastings, all of the various events that we did. And it was a really, really fun and good opportunity for, again, me to grab onto a bunch of different pieces of knowledge and try to bring it all into one place. Now, unfortunately, I don't know if you know this about Chicago, it's really fucking cold. After living in Chicago for about 3 years, I decided that I couldn't take it anymore. There are a couple of reasons why I wanted to leave the city, but one of the largest reasons was because it was so dark for so much of the year. Specifically because I was working daytime hours, I would be inside of a building, unable to see or access sunlight for about 7 months out of the year. And unfortunately, that was a little bit too taxing on my mental health, and I decided that I wanted to move a little bit closer to family. And so unfortunately, I decided to leave Chicago, now having a much stronger knowledge base in cheese, ready to take that down into Atlanta. Living in Atlanta was not as much fun as living in Chicago. One of the things about Atlanta is that the traffic is fucking awful, and there's no escaping it ever. While I was in Atlanta, I worked at a little local cheese shop. This was much smaller in volume by comparison from Italy. It was slightly weird going from a big corporate conglomerate to instead moving down to a small little cheese shop funded by a millionaire that's owned by a guy and run by like 4 people underneath him at any given time. But it was an absolutely, again, wonderful opportunity for me to learn about more products, a wonderful opportunity for me to be able to learn more about the technology specifically around cheese. And this job was actually instrumental in me learning how to make mozzarella. That was one of my main positions at that job, was being responsible for the main production of mozzarella, stracciatella, bocconcini, all of the fresh made cheeses. After being in Atlanta for a little while, I decided to go back down to Columbus, my hometown. Moving to Columbus was really important to me for a couple of reasons at this point. One, because I wanted to be closer to family, not have to spend as much time just sitting in traffic trying to get to family, but also because I was ready to get out from other capital owners. Upon getting to Columbus, again, as always, in order to maintain things, I had to get a job. And so I got a job at a local Italian restaurant being their pasta maker. I have history, again, from my classes at Italy, as well as all the work that I did at Italy on making pasta, so it seemed like a good fit. While working there, I was responsible for all of the pasta production, making bucatini, radiatore, rigatoni, mafaldi, scampi on a daily basis, as needed per the needs of the business, as well as making all of the ravioli, as well as doing various specials throughout the week as needed. But the most important thing was that this job allowed me a little bit of time and flexibility to focus on my own path, which brings me to here, where we are now. Earlier this year, I launched my own cheese company called Cheeseweeb, with a focus on trying to help as many people as possible and teach as many people about cheese as I possibly can. And that's why I'm here, starting a YouTube channel. So the actual plan for the YouTube channel is to be able to create a series, essentially being the complete compendium of cheese throughout history. My goal is for anybody that wants to come into this career path to be able to have the opportunity to learn anything they could possibly want, and to be able to provide all of that in one place. But there's a problem. As much as I want to focus just on doing cheese, again, I mentioned in the beginning, I have this dream. I have a dream where nobody ever starves again in this world. I don't know if you know this, but as it stands, approximately 24,000 to 25,000 people starve every single day on this world, 10,000 of which are children. I personally find that to be unacceptable in a time in which we have the resources, technology, and manpower to be able to completely avoid anybody from ever starving. As I want to focus on teaching people about cheese, I also, and maybe this just comes from the way I was raised from my grandmother and mom, I also just want people to be able to be there to enjoy that cheese. And as it stands right now, we're on track to ending the world. You see, climate change is getting worse every single day, and the people in charge of the world are actively trying to enrich themselves and protect their pedophile rings instead of actually addressing the problems that the people are being affected by. I've had this idea for a long time. I think I first thought about it when I was around 6 years old, but the general idea is that if people have their needs met, if people can have their material conditions secured for them on a consistent basis, then people will be good. People will want to strive for a good life because they aren't being forced to compete against one another for finite resources. So it seems like if I want to achieve my dream of nobody ever starving, there's really three things that we have to fight against in order to be able to make that a reality. Namely, conservatism, religion, and capitalism. Organized religion specifically does its best to make sure that the entire populace does not have critical thinking skills, because critical thinking skills would dismantle the idea of God being real. Now, aside from anybody's individual relationship with religion or any kind of deity, there's something I think inherently wrong about trying to maintain a populace that cannot think for themselves. Now, in my experience, if you have a population of people that don't have the ability to critically think, those people tend to end leaning conservative. Between my training on topics like diversity and inclusion, sexual harassment, between my conversations that I've had with people while trying to be politically active in places like parks and out in the street, every time I've ever spoken to a conservative, I have not been able to find a single thing that they've actually brought up as a complaint. I've never been able to find evidence for any of those things. There simply are not abortions happening en masse or fun-abortions happening. There is simply not a flat earth. There is simply not a danger that comes inherently from vaccines. If you look at the actual evidence and science of the things brought up by conservatives, then you end up finding they're lying out of their asses about all of it. And ultimately, that's the part of the problem, is that they are victims of both indoctrination as well as being lied to. Again, if you don't have the critical thinking skills, then how are you going to be able to parse through what you're fed through by silver spoons on Fox News? But ultimately, I am of the belief that both of those things are protected by capitalism. Because ultimately, capitalism does not want you to have the ability to be able to take care of your property in a safe manner. Capitalism wants you to buy the products to mess up a home project, to then have to go out and buy professionals to come in and fix that project, to then cause as much cost through this cycle as possible for that money to be extracted from the lower side of the income bracket up towards the top side. And we can see this fact because currently 1% of the population has more wealth than 95% of the population in this country. And every time I've tried to bring this idea up to a conservative, I'm ultimately met with this idea of, "Yes, me lord, thank you, me lord, more gruel for me, please, sir. Let me increase your shareholder value, sir, me lord." I could probably be summed up with a couple of identifiers for convenience sake. I'm non-binary, I am an atheist, I am a communist, and my plan overall is to try to educate as many people as possible through cheese, as well as eventually starting up calls, just talking to people one-on-one, trying to understand where they're coming from and trying to find out if there's a way that we can find common ground and find a way to help each other, because at the moment, we're not doing a very good job. But if this is something that you can get behind or are interested in supporting, then I hope you'll consider subscribing. And until next time, be safe.